Winston Churchill once said that healthy citizens are the greatest asset any country can have. In recognition of World Immunization Week this month, Doctors Hospital is joining us today to discuss vaccine-preventable diseases, facts and myths surrounding vaccines, and why immunizations are critical to the health and wealth of our nation. You're watching You and Your Money.
You and Your Money is brought to you by Doctors Hospital Health System.
Welcome to the show, everyone. My guest co-host for today is Alexis Burrows, Marketing Director of Doctors Hospital. Welcome back, Alexis.
Thanks, Siobhan. It's a pleasure to be here as always. Today we have as a guest on our show, pediatrician Dr. Tamara Moss, MD, DM, who is here to talk all about World Immunization Week. So, Dr. Moss, tell us a little bit about how vaccines work and why there's such a need for a global public campaign like World Immunization Week.
Good morning, and thank you for having me on the show today. I think in order to have a true appreciation for how vaccines work, it's really important to understand how the immune system works in fighting off disease. And really the job of the immune system is to recognize pathogens or germs as invaders and then mount a response to it to eradicate them from the body. And so usually when in nature, when the immune system encounters a pathogen, it gets into gear, creates some antibodies to help fight it off and eradicate it. And usually that process can actually take several days to even several weeks to be able to fight it off properly. The great thing about the immune system is that it actually stores these antibodies as a part of its memory, so that if it ever encounters the pathogen again, it can mount a vigorous immune response in a much more rapid time, and in a matter of minutes to hours, as opposed to days to weeks. And so what vaccines do is that it imitates an infection, or it tricks the body into thinking that it's been infected or invaded by a pathogen. And so the immune system is then primed, it mounts its initial immune response, so that in the event that you do encounter these pathogens in nature, you're able to mount a vigorous and rapid response, thereby preventing the disease from actually taking place.
So, Dr. Moss, over the years, there have been lots of myths and misconceptions about immunizations. I want to bring some of those myths and misconceptions to the show and give you the opportunity to respond to those. Firstly, vaccine-preventable diseases are almost eradicated in my country, so there's no reason to uphold and increase investment in immunization.
Okay, so obviously, in my work as a pediatrician, being on the front lines of administering these vaccines, I have heard every possible myth and misconception known to man. Yeah. And the one that you've mentioned, as far as these diseases having been eliminated and there being no need for continuing such a rigorous campaign, that's decidedly false.
Okay.
What we have been able to see over the past few years to at least a decade with the decline in vaccination rates worldwide has been the reemergence of some of these deadly diseases like measles and polio, which we were previously thought to have been eradicated. Mm-hmm. And now, and they were kind of limited to probably like resource poor countries where vaccines were not readily available. But now with the decline, we've seen the emergence of measles and polio in developed countries like the United States, Canada, and because of there are so many people now unvaccinated, and then many people who cannot be vaccinated, those persons are at risk and are now seeing the deadly consequences of being infected with those illnesses.
So, Dr. Moss, another myth: vaccines can give my child autism. What would you say to that?
Okay, so I think this one I always call the big pink elephant in the room. Yeah. When it comes to vaccines. And I think that's probably one of the more long-standing myths that's been kind of hard to dispel. Autism, obviously, parents are saddened, many of them, when their child gets this diagnosis, and you kind of want to know why. Why is this happening?
Yeah.
And so vaccines have been targeted as a potential cause. And there was a study that was released in the late 1990s that named vaccines, particularly the MMR vaccine, as the cause of autism.
Wow.
Since then, the writer of that paper has admitted that he had falsified information, falsified data. That study has been retracted, and there have been hundreds of studies that have been carried out since that have shown that there is no link to autism and vaccines. And, I think something a bit closer to home for parents that I point out is that when you have a parent who brings a child in for immunizations, they get their MMR, and then at about 15 to 24 months, really start to see the emergence of autism symptoms. They say, okay, I'm done with vaccines. They then come in a few years later with a second child for their well checks, and they say, okay, we're not immunizing this child. And then that child goes on to develop features of autism spectrum disorder. So that really suggests that there's more of a genetic link, genetic cause to autism, as opposed to vaccines being the causative agent for autism.
Okay, and then you have those individuals who would state that it is better to be immunized through disease, contracting whatever disease, virus, than through vaccine. And I know this is one of the things we definitely heard during this COVID pandemic. What would be your response to that statement?
So I think because we have had such rigorous vaccine campaigns in the past, and so many people are immunized against these deadly diseases, we kind of have the luxury of not remembering the potential deadly consequences or devastating consequences of being infected with an actual illness. So by and large, there are many people who might be able to get some natural immunity, but we also have to consider infants, young children, immunocompromised people. We have to consider the elderly who aren't able to mount as vigorous an immune response to these pathogens, and will be, unfortunately, they will suffer the devastating complications of some of these illnesses. So while it may be true that some people, like the parent, for instance, might be able to withstand it, if they bring it home and give it to their 6-month-old child, they can potentially kill that child.
Yeah, Dr. Moss, thank you, but we have to take a quick break here, and when we get back, we'll discuss vaccine-preventable diseases further in further detail. This is You and Your Money. We'll be back.
Doctors Hospital's Pharmacy introduces a new spin on prescriptions called Pick Up Now, Pay Later. That's right, you can collect your medications first and pay after. How does it work? Step 1, submit a prescription online. Step 2, select the pickup site. Step 3, collect your medication. And Step 4, pay online within 14 days. For more info, call us at 242-302-4785 or visit us at doctorshosp.com.
Welcome back to You and Your Money. Here on the show, we are strong believers in the old adage, health is wealth, which is why we are always excited when Doctors Hospital is here. If you're just tuning in, Alexis Burrows, Doctors Hospital Marketing Director, is my guest co-host today. He is here along with pediatrician Dr. Tamara Moss, celebrating World Immunization Week.
So just before the break, Dr. Moss addressed some of the myths and misinformation surrounding vaccines and immunizations. Now we're discussing vaccine-preventable diseases. So Dr. Moss, can you provide us with some background information on the diseases that vaccines are available for? And what are some of the effects of those diseases and how are they transmitted?
Okay, so as it stands at present, we have vaccines available for some 25 different types of pathogens and deadly illnesses. Most of those vaccines are given in the early childhood years, from infancy up until about 5 years old. And some of the disease entities that we protect against would be things like diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, different types of pneumonias, so like pneumococcal infections, as well as meningitis infections. And what I had mentioned earlier was that, I think we kind of have the luxury at this point of not remembering how devastating some of these diseases are. When we take into account, for instance, an illness like tetanus, for instance, I had a grandparent come in with their grandbaby the other day because the child had stepped on a nail, and the grandmother was adamant, I really, really need to make sure that he gets his tetanus shot, that he is up to date, because she herself had seen as a child an older brother who had been affected by the impact of a tetanus infection. And tetanus itself can actually cause widespread paralysis in the body. And think about every single muscle in your body being paralyzed. This includes the muscles that help you to move your arms, to help you to blink, to help you to breathe. And so to have a widespread paralysis to the point that you're not allowed to, not even able to breathe properly, can lead to death, obviously. Wow. And then we think of other things like pertussis or whooping cough, for instance. The effects of that. So people may think, oh, well, it's just a cough. But it can actually cause collapse of the airway, and infants can suffocate to death. When we think about things like measles or mumps, or even the meningitis agents, they can leave children who are affected with them severely debilitated with severe neurologic complications, unable to function, unable to take care of themselves, and really relying on parents, family members, the healthcare system to look after them for the duration of their life.
And Dr. Moss, I mean, that's a lot of information, and you mentioned the tetanus and the grandmother who came in. I guess for the last 2 years, the whole conversation's been centered around COVID. Right now, there is a focus on COVID vaccinations due to the pandemic. We're seeing a new strain that's developing again. But my question to you would be, we know that the Ministry of Health has 50% of eligible Bahamians already vaccinated. What is your take, or what is your suggestion, your opinion, what recommendations would you give to Bahamians who are still unvaccinated, who may argue, well, I believe in herd immunity, I don't believe in the vaccines. What do you say to those individuals who are not vaccinated and who have not vaccinated their kids who are now of eligible age?
Well, what I would say is that we only need to think back to last summer and what our Thursday papers and the obituary sections of those papers looked like last summer. They were very, very thick volumes, very thick books. When we think of the amount of loss that we've suffered collectively as a community. I have heard the argument where people have been like, oh, well, we're just going to wait for herd immunity. But if every single person in society adopts that mindset, we'll never get to herd immunity. Herd immunity requires at least a 90% up to 95% vaccination rate within the community. And at 50%, we're nowhere near that. And then we also have to take into account the vulnerable people in the community who cannot get vaccinated. There's still no vaccine available for children under the age of 5 worldwide. And in the Bahamas specifically, children under the age of 12 are not able to be vaccinated against COVID-19. So we have had parents who have been taking their 5 to 12-year-olds away to get it done, but that is still not going to be enough to take us to herd immunity. So I think, the responsible thing to do is to really go and get immunized, and consider it a community service to get yourself immunized and get us that much closer to herd immunity.
Dr. Moss, you were talking about COVID vaccinations and children. And one of the concerns that I know I've heard parents mention is the conversation around myocarditis and COVID-19 vaccines in children. So can you speak to that concern and kind of, just answer those questions around that particular concern? Absolutely.
So myocarditis really is inflammation of the heart muscle, and it can impair heart functioning. It's a reversible side effect, both of infections with different viral pathogens that occur naturally, COVID-19 included. And it is also a side effect that we've observed with several vaccines, including the COVID-19 vaccine. So I think this kind of goes back to the question that we had addressed earlier. Is it better to get the illness naturally versus relying on the vaccine for immunity? When we looked at the rates of myocarditis occurring in children who had COVID-19 infection, the rate was actually about 35% higher than what we observed with children who would have gotten the vaccine. And we have, as far as sample sizes go and research, there have been some 4.4 million children vaccinated against COVID-19 worldwide. So we do have a substantial amount of data. And when we look at the 12 to 18 age group, it was about 0.018% was the rate of myocarditis and pericarditis in those children. And when they looked at, associated with the vaccine in particular, and when we looked at the 5 to 12-year age group, once they started those studies late last summer, there were no cases of myocarditis reported in that 5 to 11-year-old age group associated with the vaccine. But we did have cases from infancy all the way up to 21 years old, which is our cap for pediatrics, of myocarditis among all pediatric age groups with the COVID-19 infection.
Okay, Dr. Moss, we're going to take another break. This is You and Your Money. We'll be back.
Doctors Hospital is proud to announce the launch of our infusion center. This center is available for patients in need of IV hydration and nutrition therapy, blood products, long-term antibiotics, and specialized medicines for a spectrum of diseases across multiple specialties, including rheumatology, dermatology, gastroenterology, and endocrinology. We also provide the latest in therapeutic options for COVID-positive patients. Why choose Doctors Hospital? We provide quality, highly specialized care with Doctors Hospital physicians and trained infusion nurses you can trust. Seamless medication approval through our pharmacy and registration services, a safe and comfortable environment, cost-saving benefits with copay waived on medications for insured LAMP members, payment plans for the uninsured, and immediate access to emergency services. We're located at the Luton Building on Daswell Street. For more information, contact us at 242-302-3323 or email us at infusioncenter@doctorshosp.com. Doctors Hospital, trusted and best care now. Isn't your health worth it?
Welcome back to You and Your Money. I'm your host, Javon Butler, and the guest host for today's show is Doctors Hospital Marketing Director, Alexis Burrows. Also still with us, pediatrician Dr. Tamara Moss, and joining us now is registered nurse Gina Rose. She's a community nurse and the newly assigned unit manager assistant in the expanded program of immunization, which is under the Ministry of Health. Welcome to the show, Nurse Rose.
Good morning. It's good to be here, sir.
Thank you for joining us. So, Nurse Rose, for those who may not be familiar with the expanded program on immunization, please explain the role of the unit, its objectives, and the unit's contribution to public health throughout the years.
All right. Good morning, everyone. The expanded program on immunization is a very integral part of public health. Our unit is responsible for the ordering, the storing, and the supplying of vaccines throughout the public sector. It is a unit that has been formally started in 1961 in the prevention of certain vaccine preventable diseases. In that, when the program started, we offered vaccines to protect children against diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. That's the first three, and then smallpox. And since then, the program has expanded to cover about 18 diseases in country, vaccine-wise, that's available to the public from our perspective. The unit itself also collects data on the number of children that would have been vaccinated. In particular, we focus on children under the age of 1, up to 1 year old. And so we're hoping that by their primary series, once parents are compliant with bringing their children to their visits, would have completed or received certain vaccines.
Yeah.
So our role really is to, once we provide the vaccines, is to make sure, or at least encourage, our public and private sectors to vaccinate our children so that diseases can be prevented among the vulnerable population.
And Nurse Rose, what has been the general attitude of the populace towards immunizations? Is there a high level of compliance here in New Providence, in Grand Bahama, and throughout the Family Islands?
Well, I would say this. Based on the numbers that we collect year by year, start month by month, from our public clinics, and then we pull those all together at the end of the year, we would have seen a decline in the amount of children that would have been brought to clinic for immunization since the start of COVID. Okay. So prior to 2020, we would have had numbers where we had at least 95% of that childhood population, that would be those children under the age of 1 or up to 1 year, that would have been vaccinated against diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, hepatitis B, Thermophilus influenza type B. And then we look at those children that would have received the measles, mumps, and rubella at age 1. And so we would have had numbers between 95%, maybe up to 98%. Since COVID, that number percentage-wise has dropped. And so in the year of 2019, 2020, we would have seen where we probably only have like about 86% or 83% of that target population that has been coming to clinic to be vaccinated. Prior to COVID, I believe the public has been very trusting of public health and the vaccines. Since then, you would see, or you would hear, some of the persons are concerned about vaccines since COVID and all the myths associated with the COVID vaccine. And then there are some people who would think that we were trying to trick them into giving them a COVID vaccine, without their knowing. And so I told a lady, I worked in Exuma in the year of 2020. And a gentleman told me, he said, I'm not bringing my baby to be vaccinated until after COVID is gone. Because in his mind, we're going to be giving the baby the COVID vaccine as opposed to the vaccines that they should really be getting at that age. And so it is a challenge.
Yeah. And Dr. Moss, are you hearing seeing the same types of concerns when it comes to the vaccinations at the public sector, where people are afraid to bring their children to the various clinics?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think what we observed during the pandemic was the mistrust that the public had developed with the COVID-19 vaccine in particular. I think just because of how rapidly it was produced and introduced to the public, they used that mistrust and then painted all vaccines with the same brush. And so vaccines that they were quite happy to immunize their children with before that they had actually started the vaccine series, they said, no, we don't want anything. And just like Nurse Rose mentioned, there were people who felt like we were microchipping their babies. They felt like we were administering the COVID vaccine unbeknownst to them. So for a number of reasons, we did observe a decline with our routine childhood immunizations during the pandemic. So what we've been seeing now that life is sort of returning to I guess what our new normal is going to be, parents who would have stayed away from doctors' offices for a number of reasons, either due to closures or just a general fearfulness that they were going to come and pick up COVID in the office. Those parents are now bringing their children back out to catch up on their routine childhood immunizations. I haven't encountered so many who are doing it simply because it's required for school, although, there is that subset of the population. But by and large, I just find that parents want their children protected and they're bringing them in to catch up with their early childhood immunizations.
Okay. And Nurse Rose, Dr. Moss, I will allow the two of you just to give us a 30-second wrap-up. What is the message that you want our viewers to take away from today's show? when it comes to immunizations and vaccinations?
My hope is that people would recognize that we're just here trying to protect our population from certain diseases. And the vaccines are there, they are safe, and we encourage persons to take advantage of what is available to them and to protect themselves. If you're pregnant, there's a vaccine for you, the tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis, and that is to protect you and your newborn. And so we encourage the pregnant persons to take the vaccine, bring your babies back for their vaccines so that they can also be protected against these diseases that may harm them in ways that we don't even want to think about. And so that is my encouragement today
Okay, and
to our population.
Dr. Moss, you've been such a trooper. You have the last word, ma'am.
All right. So what I want to remind people of is that vaccines are just the greatest thing that's happened to public health easily within the last century. As Nurse Rose mentioned, they are safe, they're effective, they've done an excellent job of protecting communities across the globe from these devastating illnesses. And so as we move through World Immunization Week, I want parents and the public at large just to remember, go ahead, do your part. Make sure that your children are vaccinated, whatever vaccines you're due for, your tetanus boosters, all of that stuff. Go get yourself immunized, vaccinated, and protected. Let's move forward. Let's not move back. Okay?
Well, thank you to both Dr. Moss as well as Nurse Rose for joining us, and we will continue to fight and get the message out there during this immunization month. This is You and Your Money. We'll be back.
Doctors Hospital's Pharmacy introduces a new spin on prescriptions called Pick Up Now, Pay Later. That's right, you can collect your medications first and pay after. How does it work? Step 1, submit a prescription online. Step 2, select the pickup site. Step 3, collect your medication. And Step 4, pay online within 14 days. For more info, call us at 242-302-4785 or visit us at doctorshosp.com.
Welcome back to You and Your Money. Alexis, another wonderful show, as is tradition. Let's take the next 2 minutes for you to give us an update of what's going on at DHHS.
Thank you, Javon. So we recently launched our new location, our Carmichael Road, in the Central Storage Plaza, which is directly next to Bahamas Christian Fellowship Church. We are offering laboratory services out of that location and soon to be rehab services as well as primary care or prime care services. So anyone who's interested in getting to know more about what's happening at the location can call the office at 302-3270. As always, in the hospital, we're always in a need or a request mode for blood. So anyone who follows us on social media will know that we've been putting that out with some consistency. So if you're available and you're eligible, please stop by the hospital and donate some blood. We're always in need. Also, our podcast is fully up and running. We have a recent episode featuring Mr. Nobian Neely talking about ergonomics and work from home. And we also have an episode featuring today's guest, Dr. Tamara Moss, that's going to run not long after this episode airs for You and Your Money. And we've restarted our Doctors Hospital blog, so you can check out our Facebook page for all of the links to our most recent blog posts. And as always, if you have any questions, anything you want to find out about the hospital, you can reach out to us on any of our social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and you can call the hospital at 302-4700.
All right, thank you, Alexis. This has been another wonderful show. This was You and Your Money. It was indeed my pleasure to be your host, Javon Butler. Have a great day. God bless.
You and Your Money was brought to you by Doctors Hospital Health System.